The EU has urged citizens to stock up on supplies for 72 hours. In case of war,
the new reality calls for a new level of preparedness in Europe. Our citizens, member states, and businesses must be equipped with all the necessary tools to effectively prevent potential crises and respond promptly to any emergencies that may arise.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Soliar, and there will be no usual countdown of time because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen: 24 hours left. As Donald Trump thinks. Or to the war that the European Union is beginning to prepare for. While Ukraine remains fully committed to the ceasefire, while Ukrainians tremble each night under relentless attacks on the civilian infrastructure of Kharkiv, Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih, Sumy, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, the European Commission is saying, prepare. Prepare, citizens of the European Union, for war. No one can say for certain when it might begin. But it is crucial to stock up on a sufficient amount of food and essential supplies that will last for at least 72 hours. The document, which specifically spells out these recommendations, has 18 pages. And every single one of them sends a clear message to Europeans: change your mindset.
Europe is facing a new reality, overshadowed by risk and uncertainty. A full-scale Russian invasion and war against Ukraine, escalating geopolitical tensions, acts of sabotage targeting critical infrastructure, and an increase in cyber warfare activities.
Hence, Europe's desire to rearm, and perhaps, from this same logic, the idea of sending military missions to Ukraine. As Emmanuel Macron has stated, the plan is to station them in central Ukraine, along the Dnipro River, far from the front line. At the same time, these forces should not only be seen as security guarantors but also as units looking to gain experience. The experience of modern warfare. Not every country is willing or able to send troops to Ukraine. This is a coalition of the willing, as reported by the New York Times. Yet, each participating nation plays a role in establishing reliable security guarantees for Ukraine. A senior unnamed French official has also emphasized that Europe's efforts to assist Ukraine are being carried out transparently and in full coordination with our American partners, who support this approach and have told us it is a good one. Let me also remind you that French President Emmanuel Macron has made it clear, the concept of a Western presence in Ukraine, as advocated by Paris and London, does not involve deploying forces directly to the front line.
Military experience is continuously being exchanged through various processes, innovative ideas, diverse perspectives, and the real-time developments occurring on the battlefield. Partner nations carefully study our experiences, just as we consistently analyze and learn from theirs. This process is ongoing and dynamic. Are our partners continuing to gain insights from key transformational moments in this war, as well as from the evolving nature of the battlefield? Absolutely, because at this moment, everything is unfolding in real time, and we all have a clear understanding of this reality. Take, for example, the use of long-range drones, a game-changer in modern warfare. Ukraine is actively expanding its capabilities, executing powerful strikes like the one on Engels 2, where nearly 100 missiles were destroyed, or targeting military sites in the Moscow region. This is an area where we are also making significant progress. But even beyond these examples, consider how air warfare is becoming dramatically cheaper. It is no longer necessary to invest tens of millions of dollars in purchasing aircraft and then wait for years for missile production to be completed. The entire process is rapidly accelerating, becoming more efficient, and significantly more cost-effective. And this is just one of the many important lessons being learned. The use of drones along the front line, ongoing advancements in electronic warfare, and the development of cutting-edge intelligence-gathering technologies, these are all evolving at an impressive pace. Tactics, military deployment strategies, and operational methods are being thoroughly studied and analyzed by our partner nations. There is no question about it, they will undoubtedly integrate these valuable lessons into the doctrinal frameworks and strategic military planning moving forward.
So, once again, the constant threat from Russia is forcing European leaders to emphasize that they are ready for this war. But let's be honest, the numbers tell a different story. Officials tell a different story. Let's start with the numbers. Despite the Polish government's efforts to stress the urgency of military preparedness, most Poles are unwilling to undergo military training. Recent surveys show 54% of respondents don't plan to join Prime Minister Donald Tusk's training program. Only 35% expressed willingness, with just 14% saying they are absolutely ready, and 21% somewhat ready. Recently, the Polish Prime Minister asserted that many would defend their country. But the reality looks different. That's when it comes to statistics. When it comes to words and actions from officials, an interesting detail emerges from an interview with General Zaluzny, one that sheds light on how NATO countries are actually responding to Russian attacks.
Look, the Baltic states understand this very clearly. They know that Article 5 doesn't really exist, and never will. Poland understands this too. Where missiles, both theirs and Russia's, keep landing from time to time. Romania understands everything, but is silent. Sometimes they call me and say, "Stay quiet." They say, "Two Shaheeds hit your port. Why aren't you saying anything?" They say, "Please, just stay quiet." They call and say, "Why did you turn on all your electronic warfare systems? Now everything is flying toward us." I tell them, "So shoot 'em down. You've got 40 F-16s.
And while these statements appeared separately, it almost seems as if NATO's Secretary General was directly responding to Zaluzny's words. Because Mark Rutte, unexpectedly and without hesitation, issued a bold threat to Putin, warning of a devastating strike and making a firm vow to defend Europe at any cost, regardless of the consequences. And speaking of cost, that's an interesting point. The US always emphasizes it, as if to say, pay more into NATO, and we'll protect you. If not, you're on your own. Speaking in Warsaw, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte declared that Russia has been, and remains, the greatest threat to the alliance.
If anyone miscalculates and thinks they can get away with attacking Poland or any other ally, they will be met with the full force of this fierce alliance. Our response will be devastating. This must be absolutely clear to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and to anyone else who considers attacking us.
After hearing the words, Russia remains the greatest threat, you can't help but want to add a little, and you know, that one, with the dot. And ask, Russia remains the greatest threat to NATO, and
in the coalition of the determined, there are France and Britain. It's good, but without the United States, some countries have buried their swords, hidden away, and not just stuck their heads in the sand, but gone even deeper. So, what does Reuters say? These European countries are stepping back from ground troops and trying to reorient what they were doing to something more measured. Something more measured, that's what it looks like. We strongly warn Russia, we unequivocally condemn their actions, and we ask them to refrain from attacking us, at least for the next 50 years, as a minimum. That's all Europe can say.
So, on one hand, Europe seems to be acting decisively, but on the other hand, it's more and more just words. From the US side, while they threaten Europe with the idea that they won't protect it in the event of an attack, American officials privately reassure the EU that Trump will not leave Europe without the nuclear umbrella. At least, that's what the New York Times is confident in. The same report states that Trump will be committed to NATO, but European officials fear his shifting views. The article mentions that during his first term, Trump even considered leaving NATO or only defending those who pay enough. And, I think, no one in Europe would want to test whether Trump will defend the EU because, from the leaked chats discussing strikes on the Houthis, where the editor of The Atlantic was mistakenly included, we've already learned what the Trump administration thinks. They believe they saved Europe again. And Europe should pay for it. Money in the evening, chairs in the morning. NATO itself has its own problems. I'll remind you that they've repeatedly warned that too much bureaucratic red tape hinders the movement of troops within Europe. This could be a serious issue, causing delays if war with Russia breaks out. Meanwhile, NATO's Military Committee Chairman, Robert Bauer, noted that the alliance has long needed transformation and added that NATO will support Ukraine. Though, this doesn't speak to either the possibility or the prohibition of Ukraine joining the alliance. Boris Pistorius even stated that Russia could attack NATO territory in just a few years. And at the same time, he said the Bundeswehr needs to be prepared to defend by 2029. That's why, shortly before Donald Trump's inauguration, NATO took control over Poland's air defense from the United States. But the Baltic countries are far from reassured. They understand better than anyone that the Kremlin could try to seize eastern regions of their countries at any moment, using the protection of the Russian diaspora to provoke global conflicts with NATO. That's precisely why they are actively mining borders, establishing comprehensive surveillance systems, and building robust defenses. In this context, missile technology expert Fabian Hoffman argues that a direct military conflict between NATO and Russia is much closer than many people might realize or expect. Of course, his name is well known in relatively narrow circles, so it's unlikely anyone will listen to him, but if it comes to that, we'll leave this video on YouTube to say we warned you. So, what does Fabian Hoffman say? Because of its imperial ambitions, Russia poses the greatest and most acute threat to NATO countries. If the war in Ukraine were to be frozen at this point, Moscow would require anywhere from 6 to 9 years to fully rebuild and reconstitute its army to its previous strength. During this period, Germany, along with NATO, must ensure their armed forces are ready to fight Russia. Only then can the risk of the next war in Europe be reduced. And so, we return to Europe's preparedness.
The Commission proposes a common European strategy for stockpiling to enhance access to critical resources, including for responding to emergencies and natural disasters, medical countermeasures, critical raw materials, energy equipment, and possibly food and water. According to the report, the strategy will combine EU centralized reserves with contributions from individual countries.
Despite the fact that the strategy doesn't include any new defense initiatives, it proposes a crisis management model taken from Nordic countries, where everyone is involved, society, from citizens to businesses and governments. The Commission's plan is based on the findings of the Niinisto report, which outlines proposals to improve the EU's preparedness for war and civil defense. The threat of a geopolitical conflict can manifest both practically and as military offensives. This means Europe must also be more prepared for cyber attacks, according to the draft, because since the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia has been increasing its cyber activity, including targeting critical infrastructure like energy grids. In particular, Eastern Europe has already experienced a spike in cyber attacks. China, Iran, and North Korea are also continuously attacking Western governments, companies, and other key institutions. And there is a true axis of evil, which, if not stopped, will expand further through the actions of Russian soldiers, because they are disposable. As Putin said, there are many of them. So, what do we have in the end? Trump is preparing for peace. Europe is preparing for war. And only Ukraine continues to stand firmly between the two, giving one side a chance to see the truth, while preparing the other for future attacks. The price we are paying for this is measured not in NATO contributions or the debt imposed by the United States, but in human lives. The lives of military personnel and civilians whom Russia continues to attack every day. Civil infrastructure is not off limits for strikes.
Russia, in Riyadh, refused to discuss halting strikes on civilian targets. Ukraine, in turn, insisted on a ban on attacks against civilian infrastructure.
During the negotiations, as we understand from the information provided by the American side, they completely refused to discuss civilian infrastructure. The Russian delegation told the American delegation that they did not have a mandate to discuss this issue. This was stated by Zhovkva, as Moscow knows that Ukraine does not target civilians. However, we cannot ignore these strikes either.
For us, the number one subject is, of course, the president of Ukraine. He clearly states that if strikes are made on Ukraine, the response will be symmetrical strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation, targeting infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, and so on. No one will act as they did at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when Russia calmly struck Ukrainian territory with no response. Today, Ukraine has sufficient tools. Yes, we would have liked, as we've discussed many times, for these tools to be 10 times more, as this would cause much greater destruction to Russia's infrastructure. I'm referring to infrastructure overall, not just energy. But today, we have, as you say, Plan B, C, and D, and so on, it doesn't matter. The number of drones with the appropriate range has significantly increased compared to last year. There are missiles with the appropriate range. We would like to have many more missiles. The President is negotiating today and yesterday with European countries for additional funds for military production.
And I would really like to say here that right now the United States is cutting its strategy of punishing Russia for strikes on civilians, which is a violation of the laws and customs of war, but no, because right now they seem to be busy with football. UEFA is considering the possibility of allowing Russia back into international football tournaments, and this is reported by The Independent. According to the publication's sources, some influential figures in European football are in favor of lifting the suspension, considering it groundless. Amid the potential ceasefire in Ukraine, a plan is being developed to allow Russian teams back into competitions. The International Olympic Committee is already involved in the process. The issue may be discussed at the UEFA Congress scheduled for April 3 in Belgrade. One company that left Russia due to sanctions has already returned. Italian water heater manufacturer Ariston announced it is resuming operations in Russia. And this step may signal a weakening of economic pressure on the country. It may signal that, or maybe not, as Trump would say. But I will say, if something walks like a duck, looks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then most likely, it's a duck. So once again, I emphasize and urge us to be the lend-lease for our army. Don't give up, don't hang your heads, and keep track of the time. Because the countdown of 24 hours has already begun.